Hi Stampers, this is Kim with Great Inspirations. Thank you for joining me. Today's video is the first in a series that I am calling What's So Great About? And in this series, I'll take a look at different paper crafting tools and supplies and kind of talk about what's so great about them and maybe what's not so great about them. Now, my videos will all focus on Stampin' Up! Products because I am a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. However, other brands' products, although the features may not be the same, some of the tips that I give you will work with other brands of products. So for today, our first What's So Great About is going to take a look at grid paper. So what is so great about grid paper? Well, first of all, this card and most of the cards I make start out as a concept that I sketch out on grid paper. But before we get to that, let's take a look at some of the features of Stampin' Up's grid paper. Stampin' Up's grid paper, and it's really hard to see all of it right here, but it comes, it's just the regular grid paper. It is 11 inches by just under 17 inches. It has, of course, the grid, and each of these little squares is 1/4 of an inch. It's divided into quadrants, and just if you ever need to know, it has come in handy for me at times. The left hand half of the grid paper from the very center over to the very edge and from the top to the bottom, that is the equivalent of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock. When I realized that, that really helped me to know, okay, I can design at least 4 cards right here. The right hand side is not quite as wide, but it does have a nice feature. It has a section over here where you can write notes. Now, of course, you can write notes anywhere on here, as I often do. But as you can see, I have a few notes down here, things I want to remember to talk about as far as grid paper goes. And up here, Stampin' Up! Has put a nice little place for a wish list. For, you know, you're creating a card or you see a card and you can just jot down a few things. Oh, I would like to have, oh, I don't have that color ink. I would like to have that color of ink. You know, those kinds of things. Now, this grid paper is double-sided. It has the imperial measure on one side and the metric measure on one side, or if you prefer, inches and centimeters. It comes in 2 sizes. This is just the regular grid paper, and then there is the small grid paper, and it is 7 inches by 7 inches. There are 50 sheets in it, and there are 100 sheets in the regular grid paper. But this is just like the regular grid paper, 2-sided, imperial on one side, metric on the other. Like I said, this is designed specifically to fit in to the Stamparatus, which is Stampin' Up's positioning or stamp positioning tool. And here's the mat for the photopolymer stamps. It can just kind of protect it. And here is for the cling stamps. And again, if you just want a little more protection, because these surfaces do wipe off, but this can save you a little bit of work. So there is the 7 by 7 grid paper, or the small grid paper. And they both come, whether it's the regular grid paper or the small, they both come in this nice little shrink wrapped package. And here's a nice little feature. They are between 2 pieces of cardboard, or chipboard if you prefer. And if you want to use inches, you can tear off this piece, and then there's your pad. It's ready to go. It's the same for the large grid paper, or if you prefer to use the centimeters, you can tear off this side and you're good to go. So let's talk about how I use this for a card. Now, there's lots of different things you can do, but first of all, we can cover up our workspace. it just makes a nice big area. Now some people prefer to use the smaller, but I like this because it's a nice big area to work on, to put your card together on. If I get a little adhesive someplace, I can just kind of cover it up with a little piece of scrap paper and go on. I'm not going to get my ink all over the place. You stamp with your dye ink on here, goes right into the paper, instead of like if I were to be stamping on this surface, if I stamped with the ink, then the ink would be here, it wouldn't dry, it would just be sitting there and I would get it everywhere. So this is just a great and economical way to cover up your work area. Now the other things that you can do with this, of course, you can measure, because there is a nice little ruler along the bottom and the side, and I have measured my ribbon with it and my twine time after time. But also, if I just have a random piece of cardstock laying around and I want to know if it will do for whatever project I'm working on, I can just pop that over here and measure it. Oh, 2.5 by 5.5, okay, that'll work. Or maybe perhaps I'm looking for a die cut. Oh, maybe I'll have a circle. Well, will this fit? Let's see. And I put it right here, and I can find the diameter of the circle, and this circle is going to be about, here's the edge of the die cut, so it'll be about 3 1/8. So then that way I know, and I don't have to keep going through, well, will this one work? Will that one work? Or, and you know, die cut it, and then, oh, that's too big. So that's helpful. And then this is a good pad. You know when we tell you to stamp, when we're stamping with photopolymer stamps, put a little padding under it. This works as a good pad even when you get down to where there's not a lot of sheets left, because it does have that little bit of cardboard under it. But it is a good pad for stamping on your, using to stamp your photopolymer stamps, and it just gives it that cleaner, crisper look for your image. Now, other things that you can do, we'll get some ink. And I'll bring my card in, because if you take a peek at this card, especially these shells right here, you'll see there's 3 different shades of the same color. It happens to be Flirty Flamingo. And I stamped off. So what stamp off? Well, we want to stamp on the cardstock. We ink up our stamp. We stamp. Oh, okay, well that's a little dark for me, or you want another shell, but you want it just a tad lighter, just to differentiate it a bit. You take your stamp, ink it up. There you go. You stamp off, you stamp here, and it's a little bit lighter. So the other thing, say we're stamping and you want to stamp off the edge of your cardstock a bit, and that's what I had done here. So you can just ink up your stamp, stamp off the edge. The grid paper catches the excess, there's no mess anywhere, and you're ready to continue stamping and finishing your panel for your card. And so the next thing we'll talk about is stamping sentiments. When I closed my ink pad for whatever reason. When we're stamping sentiments, we always like to get them straight. So what I do is I take my sentiment and I line it up on the lines on the grid paper. I know that's really hard to see, isn't it? Move it over here. Just here, I'll line it up right below this one. And when it's lined up with the lines, I take my block and I look 1 line or 2 lines above the sentiment and put the top of my block there, press down, ink up. Now let's see if it's straight. So I'll go over here, stamp on the grid. Yep, looks straight to me. So then we can get my paper straight. I use that dark center line there to kind of line my paper up. line my block up, and stamp my sentiment, and it's straight. So there's another way grid paper comes in handy. And then grid paper is good for masking. And we're going to use a different color ink. And when I say masking, I mean using like a stencil, or Stampin' Up! Calls them decorative mask. And I have one right here. And I have some cardstock. So I'm going to put my cardstock, line it up with one of the lines. And I always cut my cardstock a little bigger than what I think I will need. So if, say, one side looks a little better, or the top or the bottom looks a little better, I can trim things away that I don't like. So I'm just going to put a little bit of washi tape on the corners here, and then I'm going to line the mask up with one of the grid lines there, and then I have a little washi tape to put on the corners. And then I'm going to get my blending brush, and we'll use some Night of Navy ink. Ink up my blending brush and start to blend. And now I know, because I've lined everything up with the lines on the grid, that when I finish my design, it will be straight on the paper instead of cockeyed. I'm really good at getting things cockeyed, so I really appreciate the lines. Do a little bit more here and take it off, and we'll just take a peek at it. Okay. And there's the design. Looks pretty good, looks nice and straight. And as you can see, where we've gone over, it doesn't matter because our area was covered. And get this little bit of washi tape off. And there we go. So that's another way grid paper comes in handy. And then the last thing I'm going to share is nice big giant stamps or background stamps, and how I use grid paper to help me with them. Now, a lot of times I will use my Stamparatus because it's just really great to use, and you can stamp and restamp until you get the color just the way you want it. But sometimes I just don't do that. Sometimes I'm just, no, just ink this up and I'll just get my paper where I want it. Because it's really hard to take this and line it up and stamp down and get it correct. So ink up the stamp, then I will place my paper right where I want it on these butterflies, and then I just bring my grid paper over and I rub. And actually I usually use I think my paper just moved, my cardstock. I usually use like a bone folder to go over this, but a block will do. And then lift it up. And there's our butterflies. No mess anywhere. And I don't have to try to stamp this and get it like just so. So there's another way that grid paper is very helpful. Comes in handy. And we'll close up the ink, because you all know I will get it all over me if I do not. I'll bring my card back in here that I made with the grid paper. And I was not going to show you this at first. I was going to redo it, but I thought, no, you might as well just see how I work and how I come up with it. But when I was designing this card, I truly did use grid paper. And here's my mess. You can see right here is the idea for the card. I just translated it to my cardstock. Over here, I use this grid paper just to do some color swatches to see if I liked these 3 colors together, which happens to be Blushing Bride, Fleur de Flamingo, and Calypso Coral. And then here is where I practiced to see if I would like how I'd lined up the Happy Birthday. That was also a photopolymer stamp. I'd line them up on the grid and stamp to see if I would like how it turned out. I did, and it was straight, so I put it on the card. You can see where I've stamped off more than once. You can see I have over here quite a bit of notes and some measurements. So I wasn't kidding when I said I do use this grid paper when designing my cards, and as you can see, my process is a little messy maybe, and like I said, I did think about doing it and doing it real nice and neat, but I thought no, because that's not me, and you would probably figure that one out. So anyway, that's what is so great about grid paper. Now, do you need it to stamp and to be successful in stamping and creating your cards and other projects? No, you don't. I went for a long time before I bought it. But I would use scrap paper or whatever else I had. I also used to have another grid that I could wipe off. I had issues with that because I was getting ink everywhere. So that was the main reason I like this. It covers my area. You stamp on it, the ink isn't going to come off. And that's why I began purchasing it. So I really can't see a downside. I mean, it's recyclable, you know, it's economical. It's like, I think it's $12.50 for 100 sheets, so that's like 12.5 cents per sheet. I use front and back. And as you can see from this, I really use it. So for me, it's well worth it. You maybe can do without it. This is not, in my mind, not a necessity in a craft room, but it sure does make life easier. So that's our first what's so great about, and that's what's so great about grid paper. Now, on my blog, there will be a post that corresponds to this video, and in the description of this video, there will be a link to that post, and it will tell you basically everything I've said in this video, and it also will give you the all the supplies on how to make this card and how I did the watercoloring and the stamping. So until next time, stamp happy.